It started with a whisper, the kind that slips through back channels, rattles diplomatic halls, and forces the world to question what game is really being played. Jamaica, under Andrew Holness, wasn't just watching Burkina Faso's rise. It was allegedly working overtime to contain it. And when the first reports surfaced that Ibrahim Traoré was being targeted through shadowy commercial pressure campaigns, that was the moment the story stopped being local and became global. Something was moving in the dark, something calculated, and you'll see why it hit the continent like a shockwave. Is this strategic containment or a reckless provocation? Drop your take, because the next twist hits harder. The scheme wasn't loud, wasn't messy, wasn't the kind of geopolitical drama you'd see on a public stage. Instead, analysts say it was engineered like a slow constriction, targeted trade bottlenecks, subtle supply chain disruptions, and a tightening of economic screws that never officially pointed back to Kingston. Holness seemed to be playing the long game. Weaken Traoré's momentum quietly, stall Burkina Faso's reforms subtly, then watch as pressure mounts from the inside. But Traoré? He's built different, and the world just found out why. Do you think small nations should play these shadow games? Comment below, because the pressure is about to escalate. Traoré didn't flinch. At a time when most leaders would have scrambled to negotiate or beg for relief, he doubled down. He went public with signals of strength, reinforcing the message that Burkina Faso would not bow to foreign interference, no matter how strategic or disguised. It wasn't just defiance, it was a warning. And it caught everyone off guard, because no one expected a leader this young to bring that level of geopolitical fire. Is this bold resilience or risky defiance? Tell us your view, because Holness wasn't done yet. As the economic tension thickened, insiders say diplomatic messages started moving between Caribbean administrations and Western partners who have long viewed an empowered Burkina Faso as a complication. Suddenly, Jamaica's moves didn't look like a solo mission. They looked like a coordinated effort to slow a rising African counternarrative. The timing, the tactics, the silence, it all aligned too perfectly. Could this be the making of a multi-front containment strategy? Debate it below, because the next connection might shock you. Social media exploded. Caribbean commentators questioned why Jamaica, a nation also fighting its own development battles, would risk its reputation by undermining another global South nation instead of collaborating with it. Meanwhile, African voices turned this into a rallying cry, saying Traoré's resistance symbolized a broader continental refusal to be boxed in. The divide grew, sparking digital battles, cultural pride wars, and questions about who truly benefits from a weakened Burkina Faso. Is this global solidarity forming or a regional fracture widening? Let us know, because reactions on the ground only grew louder. But here's where everything shifted. Traoré, instead of escalating publicly, started reinforcing alliances quietly. Regional partners, defense collaborators, economic blocs looking to diversify away from traditional Western influence. While Jamaica pressed commercially, Burkina Faso countered ideologically, framing itself as the model for African sovereignty and resilience. This wasn't just resistance. It was a narrative war, and Traoré was winning hearts faster than Jamaica could adjust its playbook. Will these alliances hold under pressure? Drop a prediction, because hidden actors are stepping in next. Holness, facing rising scrutiny, maintained his polished diplomatic composure, never acknowledging any covert campaign. But analysts noticed patterns. Trade negotiations paused at suspicious moments, supply routes tightened unexpectedly, and economic data reflected abrupt external shifts. It painted a picture that was too sharp, too synchronized to be coincidence. If Jamaica wasn't behind it, someone was, and they were using Jamaica as the perfect deniable tool. Do you think Holness is the mastermind or a middleman? Comment your theory, because the motives run deeper. Traoré's refusal to bend transformed the crisis into something else entirely. A test of whether small African nations can survive coordinated financial pressure from afar. His stance turned into a continental symbol, the idea that sovereignty isn't given, it's defended. And every day he held firm, the whispers of external sabotage grew weaker while his internal legitimacy grew stronger. Is this a turning point for African political independence? Share your thoughts, because the final wave is approaching. By the time the world realized the scale of the tug of war, it was too late. Burkina Faso had endured the commercial hits, adapted to the disruptions, and emerged with an even clearer vision of its future. Traore didn't just survive the pressure, he weaponized it, proving resilience can outshine even the sharpest forms of sabotage. Meanwhile, Jamaica now faces questions about its role in a geopolitical gamble that may have backfired. So what comes next? Reconciliation, escalation, or a new alliance landscape entirely? Drop your final prediction because the next chapter could redraw more than one map. He never saw it coming. Not like this. A quiet storm rising thousands of miles away, crafted not with tanks or soldiers, but with contracts, tariffs, and economic chokeholds. And yet, it was aimed straight at him. Ibrahim Traoré, the youngest leader on the continent, the man who dared to stand against the old order. But here's the part no one expected. This wasn't coming from Paris or Washington or ECOWAS. It was coming from Jamaica, and the Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, had just authorized a move that would shake the ground beneath Burkina Faso. Stay with this story because the turning point that happens later reshapes everything you thought you knew about African resistance. The assault didn't arrive with televised statements or diplomatic showdowns. It moved in whispers, trade restrictions tightening like invisible ropes around Burkina Faso's economy, foreign partners stepping back as if on a silent cue, and commercial corridors suddenly blocked by what analysts called coincidental timing. But this was no coincidence. It was a pressure campaign in full effect. Holness allegedly greenlit measures designed to destabilize, to fracture, to force Traoré into a defensive crouch. On paper, it looked clean. In reality, it was the opening shot in a shadow war. And here's where the story turns darker. The moment Traoré realized the attack was coordinated, he didn't retreat. He rose. To understand why this hit so hard, you have to understand what Burkina Faso represents. A nation once shackled by French influence, once treated as a pawn in West Africa's political chessboard, now suddenly rewriting its destiny under a young captain with fire in his voice. Traoré spoke of sovereignty not as a slogan, but as a mission. He challenged ECOWAS, reshaped alliances, welcomed partners who respected African agency, not African obedience. For the first time in decades, a Burkinabe leader wasn't bending the knee. And that terrified many, because when one small nation stands tall, the entire continent begins to imagine standing too. But then, something unexpected happened. The more pressure Holness applied, the more united Burkina Faso became. The commercial assault hit with precision. Markets tightened. Export routes were strangled. International financiers, always quick to adjust their risk assessments, pulled back. Every signal suggested that Burkina Faso should fold, apologize, or quietly realign itself with the global status quo. But Traoré refused. He met each blow with defiance, telling his people that sovereignty is forged through struggle, not smooth negotiations. And the people believed him. Crowds grew. Voices rose. It wasn't just politics anymore, it was identity. But this was only the beginning, because the impact of Jamaica's actions would soon backfire in a way no strategist predicted. Instead of isolating Traoré, the campaign turned him into a symbol, a figure larger than office, larger than the crisis. He became the living image of African resistance. State by state, voice by voice, the continent watched. From Bamako to Niamey, from Accra to Addis Ababa, social feeds exploded with one message. They're trying to break him because he's changing the game. And every attempt to weaken him only sharpened his message. Burkina Faso wasn't collapsing, it was awakening. Foreign pressure had accidentally created a hero. And here's the twist. The louder the global pushback grew, the more countries quietly began offering Burkina Faso alternative trade channels. The plan to suffocate the nation was starting to unravel. Traoré responded not with rage, but with clarity. He addressed his nation as if preparing them for a long night, reminding them that every revolution is tested, every dream is challenged, every movement is attacked before it becomes unstoppable. His words carried weight because they weren't empty. They were grounded in a history Africans knew too well: exploitation, manipulation, and the endless cycle of foreign-backed destabilization. Yet something felt different this time. Burkina Faso wasn't standing alone. They were standing with a leader who refused to blink. and this refusal turned the assault into fuel. By the time the world realized what had happened, it was too late to reverse it. The attempt to weaken Traoré had strengthened him. The measures meant to break Burkina Faso had unified it. And Andrew Holness, far from halting a rising African movement, had unknowingly pushed it into its next chapter. Because what comes next, the response Traoré is preparing, could redefine how small nations fight global pressure. And trust me, you'll want to see what happens in that next chapter. It started with a whisper, one so faint most nations would have ignored it. But not this time. Not when the whisper carried a name that shouldn't have been there. Jamaica. And behind it, the unmistakable shadow of Andrew Holness. Suddenly, the world found itself staring at a strange, unexpected front in global politics. A Caribbean nation allegedly launching a silent commercial assault on Burkina Faso. Not with armies, not with sanctions, but with something far more subtle and far more dangerous. And here's the part that will shock you. The target wasn't a corporation, a sector, or an institution. It was Ibrahim Traoré himself. Stay with this story, because the twist waiting at the end changes everything you thought you knew about African resilience. From Kingston's polished diplomatic corridors emerged plans, quiet, strategic, carefully disguised, to interrupt Burkina Faso's rise. Rumors spread that Holness approved a series of commercial maneuvers designed to shake the foundations of Traoré's government. Deals stalled. Trade routes tightened. Foreign partners suddenly reconsidered agreements they had praised just months earlier. It looked clean on the surface, almost like routine geopolitical adjustments. But analysts saw the pattern. A slow, crushing pressure intended to corner Traoré's reforms before they fully matured. And here's where the story turns darker. Because this wasn't just about economics. This was about stopping a young African leader from reshaping the narrative of power. To understand why this mattered, you must understand what Traoré represented. Burkina Faso had spent decades under external influence. France pulling strings, ECOWAS issuing threats, and global institutions enforcing their silent expectations. But when Traoré took the stage, everything shifted. A 30-something captain turned head of state, speaking not with fear, but with fire. He questioned France. He confronted ECOWAS. He opened doors to partners who respected sovereignty, from Russia to fellow Sahel states. His rise wasn't just political, it was symbolic, a challenge to the old world order. So imagine the panic behind closed doors when a small landlocked nation dared to chart its own path. This commercial attack? It was the world's attempt to remind Burkina Faso of its place. But then, something unexpected happened. Traoré didn't break. He didn't panic. He didn't even shift tone. Instead, he did the opposite. He stood taller. Every commercial restriction Jamaica launched, every diplomatic ripple Holness triggered, became fuel for Traoré's momentum. He addressed his people with a calm, unshakable resolve, insisting that sovereignty is worth defending, no matter the price. Crowds gathered, voices amplified. What was meant to be a destabilizing blow became the ignition point of national unity. In a country long wounded by coups, insurgencies, and foreign intervention, something new emerged: collective defiance. And this is where the plot thickens. Because the world didn't expect Burkina Faso to rise from pressure, it expected collapse. As the commercial offensive progressed, something even stranger happened. The tighter the squeeze, the louder the African solidarity grew. Mali, Niger, Guinea, nations already aligned with Burkina Faso, saw the assault for what it was: another attempt to silence a rising Sahel awakening. Social media turned into a battleground, with Africans demanding answers. Why was Jamaica targeting a fellow post-colonial nation fighting for self-determination? Who stood to gain from Burkina Faso's destabilization? And the bigger, scarier question: who was whispering behind Holness, guiding his hand? Suddenly, the assault didn't look Jamaican at all. It looked like a proxy hit. But this was only the beginning. Traoré's refusal to submit transformed him into something beyond a president. He became a symbol, a reminder that leadership isn't tested by comfort, but by crisis. Under pressure, many leaders fold, many compromise, many retreat. But Traoré? He sharpened. The attacks forged him. Every challenge became an opportunity, an opening to strengthen alliances, rally his people, and expose the hidden power structures trying to hold Burkina Faso back. What began as a tactical commercial strike had now ignited a national resurgence. And that's the irony Holness never saw coming. The plan intended to limit Burkina Faso's regional growth became the very spark that accelerated it. A commercial assault meant to weaken Traoré instead carved him into the kind of leader history remembers. Because true leadership isn't measured by peace. It's measured by what a nation becomes under fire. And Burkina Faso under Traoré is just getting started. No one expected the storm to come from across the Atlantic. Not from Jamaica. Not from a nation known more for music and tourism than geopolitical confrontation. But suddenly, in the shadows of global commerce, a shocking revelation began to surface. Evidence hinting that Prime Minister Andrew Holness might be quietly moving against Burkina Faso's economic interests. And at the center of that brewing conflict stood one man, Ibrahim Traoré, the youngest leader on the continent, the symbol of defiance, the voice of forgotten nations. If these whispers were true, then a new kind of war had just begun. Stay with this story, because the revelation waiting at the end will flip everything on its head. At first, the signs were subtle, too subtle for the untrained eye. Trade delays, suspicious policy adjustments, Caribbean financial circles suddenly distancing themselves from Sahel partnerships. But analysts watching from afar noticed a pattern. Each economic disruption traced back to sectors crucial to Burkina Faso's reform agenda. And if that wasn't enough, diplomatic murmurs began emerging, hinting that Holness's administration played a role in shaping these commercial choke points. It didn't look like an accident. It looked like a strategy. And here's where the story turns darker. The more the evidence grew, the clearer it became that the real target wasn't Burkina Faso. It was Traoré himself. To understand the danger, you must understand who Traoré is. A captain who rose in a time of chaos. A leader who broke away from decades of French control. A man who dared to tell ECOWAS no. And dared to tell his people that sovereignty is not a gift, it's a fight. Under his leadership, Burkina Faso shifted toward bold alliances, including Russia and the Sahel coalition, positioning itself as a symbol of African self-determination. And for some global players, that alone made him a threat. A young revolutionary rewriting the rules. A rising figure who couldn't be bought, pressured, or contained. So when the commercial strike began, many believed it would break him. But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of collapsing under foreign pressure, Traoré transformed it into fuel. What his enemies intended as sabotage became the spark of renewal. As trade tensions tightened, as predictions of his downfall grew louder, he stepped forward with more confidence than ever before. He addressed his nation not like a leader on the defensive, but like one preparing for a long-awaited transformation. His message was simple. They are attacking us because they fear what we are becoming. And this message struck a chord. People rallied. Farmers, soldiers, youth movements, elders. Everyone began to see the assault not as a threat, but as validation. This wasn't just politics anymore. It was pride. It was identity. And it was awakening. Then came the turning point, a shift no foreign strategist saw coming. The pressure that was designed to weaken Burkina Faso instead forced the nation to innovate. New trade routes were explored. New partnerships strengthened. Domestic industries expanded with a sense of urgency not seen in decades. Traoré didn't just endure the storm, he harnessed it. The very forces meant to destabilize his reforms ended up accelerating them. Like a blade refined by fire, his leadership became sharper, clearer, unshakable. And in the eyes of his people, he was no longer just a president. He was a shield. By now, global observers were stunned. How did a small, landlocked nation flip a coordinated economic strike into a national resurgence? How did a young leader under attack rise even higher? And the answer was simple. Traoré understood something his adversaries didn't. He knew that pressure reveals character. He knew that adversity molds nations. And he knew that Burkina Faso's struggle was larger than politics. It was a generational fight for dignity. In the end, Traore rose not despite the attack, but because of it. Challenge became momentum, sabotage became strategy, and the attempt to break him became the moment he proved exactly why Africa's new generation of leaders cannot be intimidated. Because in a world built on quiet power plays, true strength isn't loud. It's forged, and Traore is just getting started.